welcome to another math video lesson. You'll see behind me a catamaran sitting out on the Caribbean Sea. I'm going to hop on one of those a little bit later and take a tour of Dunn River Falls. But for now, let's go ahead and jump into today's math video. In Lesson 2-2, we are going to focus on solving some very simple and basic 1- and 2-step equations. So first off, we want to talk about an equation, what an equation is. An equation is a number sentence that contains an equal symbol. You'll remember in Unit 1 we discussed a lot about expressions. Those were the ones that did not have equal signs. So we're going to focus more on equations in this unit, and those are going to involve those equal signs. And an equation is made up of two different expressions, and that equal sign is going to be what links them together. So the whole main idea of what we are doing when we are solving any type of equation is to what we call isolate the variable. That means to get it all by itself so that it is the only thing on its side of the equation. When you're thinking about equations and when you're trying to solve for a variable and isolate a variable, it's helpful to think of the two sides of the equation as scales. We start out with the two sides of the equation being equal, and then whatever we do to one side, that's going to tilt it one way or the other. So to balance that out, we have to do the exact same thing to the other side. So for example, in the illustration there in your packet, we have a scale that is perfectly balanced with 3 pounds on each side. If we were to add 2 pounds to one side or the other, it's going to weigh that side down more than the other. So the only way that we can still have those be equal and balanced is to do that to both sides. And what we're going to use to do that is going to be inverse operations. So whenever we use these inverse operations, whatever we use on one side, we have to use the other. So we did talk about inverse operations some in Unit 1 when we talked about square roots and squares being inverses. These should be recaps, but just to make sure that you remember what your inverse operations are, if you see addition, the inverse of addition is going to be subtraction. So if we have to get rid of an addition in our equation, we're going to do subtraction to get rid of that. And you can probably guess then that the inverse of subtraction is addition. Alright, then we move on to multiplication and division. They are inverses of each other. So the inverse of multiplication is division, and the inverse of division is multiplication. Alright, so let's jump in and look at an example. So in example 1, we are asked to solve for x. So what we need to do is get that x variable all by itself. We want to get it so that it's the only thing on either the left side of the equation or the right side of the equation. It doesn't matter which, as long as it's by itself. So if we look at what is happening to that x, we are adding a -3, or you could look at it as subtracting a 3. So to undo a -3 and to move it to the other side, cancel out a -3, we would want to add 3. Now if we just add 3 on that side, it wouldn't be balanced. So we need to make sure that we add it on the other side as well. So when I combine these, the -3 and the +3 will add and give me 0, and that's going to leave me with x equals 18. And it's really easy to check these problems because all I have to do is take what I got and plug it back into the original equation. So my original equation was -3 plus x. So if I do -3, we said our x was equal to 18, so I would plug in 18 there, and it should equal 15. And if I do -3 and 18 added together, that does give me 15 equals 15. So I know that my answer is correct. So that's the good thing about these type of problems, is you can always check to see if you got it right. So on the next one, we are looking at 1/4 of n equals 2 to the 7th. Now we can look at this two different ways. The first way I'm going to look at is how it's written right now, 1/4 times n. To get rid of multiplication, our inverse is division. So we want to divide both sides by 1/14. So I'm going to do a little scratch work off to the side. What we're really doing on the left side is 2/7 divided by 1/14. Because on the left side, those are going to cancel out since they're inverse operations. And it's going to leave us with just an n on the left side. So remember, to divide fractions, we're going to keep the first number. We're going to change it to multiplication. And then we are going to flip the fraction. So that's going to become 14 over 1. When I multiply this out, I can kind of simplify as I go. 7 goes into 7 one time. It also goes into 14 two times. So then I'm going to do the top times each other. 2 times 2 gives me 4. And 4 over 1 gives me 4. So my n is equal to 4. And again, I can plug this back in and check. And it should give us 2/7 on either way. Now the other way that you could look at that, and I'm going to rewrite it off to the side here, we could have looked at 1 over 14n as a division problem. Because if you multiplied this out, 1 times n would give you n, and that would be n over 14 equals 2 over 7. So if we were looking at this perspective where it was division, we would undo by multiplying. So we would multiply both sides by 14. It would cancel out on the left, and we would have n equals, and then we just need to simplify this. And that's going to be very similar to what we had down here. Because 7 goes into 7 one time, it goes into 14 twice, and 2 times 2 is 4. So either way, we get the answer as 4. So you can look at that whichever way is a little bit easier for you. Sometimes for clearing fractions, it is easier to use multiplication than it actually is to use that division. Alright, there are 2 you-try problems. Go ahead and give those an attempt. Once you're done, make sure you check your answers in the solution guide and move on to the next video.